Welcome to Restoration Movement Conversations. My name is Josh Stuckey, and I'm here with my co-host, Jamie Franke. And we welcome you to our podcast today. Today's subject is a continuation of something we started last week with regards to the Phillip Yancey situation and his 8-year-long affair that was recently exposed. And just a quick review of what we talked about last time, primarily focused on how can we prevent this from happening in our local churches more than discussing his individual circumstance, because the truth is this has happened with other people throughout the church and in history. And so it's less about any individual man and about our own local churches and what we can do to help with regards to preventing that. And that's really where we're going to continue our discussion. And where we're going to go next is the idea of being proactive. What we want to do is set up our churches and ourselves for success in this area. We must realize, and Jamie quoted a verse from 1 Corinthians, I think it was chapter 12 last week, is that right? About
let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. 1 Corinthians 10:12.
Sorry. Yep, 10:12. Okay. Sorry for the awkwardness there. I'm glad Jamie could save me in that minute. I should have written that down. And so we want to realize that any of us, absolutely any of us, man or woman, Christian or preacher, elder, deacon, it doesn't matter, any of us are capable of falling in this area. And it is exactly when we think we are immune to a sin that Satan will target us with it. And go ahead, Jamie.
Josh, I might just add, we've obviously are thinking in terms of sexual sin from Phillip Yancey's situation and other circumstances that we've alluded to or will allude to here today, but this can also come in other forms, other sins, and I'm thinking, especially like theft and extortion, that sort of thing, dishonesty with the church and how you do things. Sometimes it might not be sexual sin, but it can be other kinds of sin that can get you in certainly big trouble as well.
Yes. And Satan will always attempt to use whatever he can to snare us. So I want to start out with what are probably going to be pretty obvious ideas to be proactive in your local church, but I don't think they're absolutely obvious to everyone, so we want to cover our basis. And just a very simple rule, especially for men to follow, is that you never want to be alone with a member of the opposite sex who isn't your wife or your daughter. You don't want to do that under any circumstances. And this also goes with the fact that you don't want to be alone with anybody else's kid for any reason. I'm very active in youth ministry, and I'm around a lot of other people's kids, and I always make sure that I'm never alone with somebody else's kid. And especially if it's a female student, I want a female adult with me if I need to have a conversation with them. Never two men with a young lady. Jamie?
So, Josh, I might ask, because this does get into just logistic things sometimes.
Yes.
So, like, what happens if, let's say a 13-year-old boy needs a ride home, or any number of things that are very innocent, no kind of routine. Do you make any exceptions for any of those kinds of scenarios or anything that way?
Well, I've had a couple of circumstances where there was no other option than for me to take somebody home, and I was the only option. So I know this sounds kind of funny, but I tell the student, you need to sit in the back seat, and I'm going to keep my phone on record the entire time.
That way,
and I tell them that. And I'm like, this isn't because I think you're going to do anything wrong or I'm going to do anything wrong. This is so that nobody else thinks that either.
Right.
And that's just for everybody's safety. It doesn't have to be weird unless we make it weird.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way I've handled that in the past.
So do you always I don't know, let me throw out a scenario like preacher boys, like going on a hospital call, let's say.
Sure.
You've maybe got 2 or 3 boys you ask, but only one of them can go, something like that. How
Sure.
do you handle that
Then we
scenario?
don't do it.
Okay.
We just don't do it. They all know that. They all understand that.
So it's only if you have multiple, in that case, boys who could go with you that you would do it then.
And if I take the teacher girls, I'm going to have at least one other adult female with me.
Okay.
Yep. And we've done all that in the past. And once you establish those boundaries and protocols, everybody just does it.
Yeah, sure.
Just be upfront and just say, look, it's only weird if we make it weird. This is just so that everybody always feels safe. Almost within seconds, people are like, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And Josh, this is a bit of a side note, but you're talking about safety of kids. One thing I know that comes to mind for many people, and probably rightly so, is doing background checks on adults and
Yes.
that sort of thing. I think I would argue, though, the best preventative way are setting in place appropriate policies like this. The problem with background checks is it only checks people if they've gotten caught. You
Right.
know, so
Right.
what about the predators who've never been caught? They're not going to pop up on a background check. I think I could argue that putting into place policies like this are better preventative, better protection than background checks would be. Not that it has to be an either or thing, but if you're looking at what's going to be effective, just remembering these kinds of things is really an effective way to go.
And another thing that I suggest, and it's easy to do in today's age, is meet where there's a camera.
Oh, sure. That way you have proof.
If I need to meet with a woman, for example, at church, and she would really prefer it just be her and I, then I always meet where there's a surveillance camera. For example, in the FLC, I have a surveillance camera that records to 2 different sources. And I always say we're going to meet here because of that. We're going to meet within view of it, and it does record our conversation. So be
Yeah,
aware of that.
right.
Yeah,
It's really better if you can just have somebody else around if
it
that's
really is.
possible.
Yeah.
That's just the better practice.
And also, it's always a very open area. Like the FLC has a ton of windows. It's very public. Keep the
Right.
doors unlocked. Windows are never covered. That kind of a thing.
Now, Josh, I'm also curious because I've thought about some of this too, as probably most ministers have. Do you is there an age difference where it's not all that, there doesn't matter all that much? Like as an example, as a young minister, I would have thought, didn't think anything about going and visiting somebody the age of my grandmother,
Right.
at their home or whatever, something like that. Uh, I don't think it's probably that as that big of a concern that way. Do you, in your mind, have sort of an age difference that where that doesn't become as much of a important policy anymore?
It's kind of funny you bring up the grandma, grandpa. I call it the grandma, grandpa rule. If the person could be your grandmother or grandfather, you're fine.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Now I think the other way, well, the name last week we talked about briefly, trying to think of Steve Lawson, I think was a 70-year-old man having a relationship with a 28-year-old woman, I believe. So going the other way, it's not the same. But
no,
if you're a
no,
young preacher or ministering, a young person ministering, you're okay probably for the age of your grandparents.
right. And also things like the nursing home, I don't worry about that.
Right, right. Of course,
Yeah,
there's people around and
yeah. And
whatever.
also I keep the door open, keep the window shades open. And here's the deal. If you're ever uncomfortable, either leave or turn on a recording device, and be sure you tell the other person you're going to turn on a recording device.
Sure. Yeah.
I understand in the state of Missouri, it's a one-party state. You don't have to tell the other person. But let me tell you what happens if they find out that you recorded the conversation and didn't tell them. They will never trust you again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if you tell them up front, hey, I feel like I need to record this. I want you to know that when we're done, I'll immediately send you the recording. That's fair. Then everybody's informed. No
Sure.
trust is lost. I've done that a couple of times. So, and I've had people walk away because they weren't comfortable with that. Well, then that's what happens.
Right. Sure. Sure. It is. It's in this day and time, you've got to think about these kind of things.
You do. And just to kind of cover another tangible product of this discussion is what happens if an accusation comes up. Now, I myself have never been accused, but I have, for various reasons, been involved with a lot of other people being accused.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do want to provide a little bit of lay information. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a police officer or anything like that, but just as somebody who's experienced this on the behalf of others many times, there are some things in which you should do if you are accused. And the first one is be quiet. Just that's the first one.
Yep.
Don't go talking about this to every person. You want to inform your church leadership if there is a genuine accusation, and then you need to be quiet. You do not want to involve anybody in this that otherwise needs to be involved. We live in a world where accusations can be career-ending just because they're accusations.
Yeah.
So for the first rule is to be quiet. The second rule is if an actual investigation occurs by police or CPS or anybody else, you need a lawyer. This is not because you are guilty necessarily. This is because you are not a law expert. And people have incriminated themselves by accident many times in life.
Even if they're not legitimately not guilty, just
Yes.
something that they say can be taken wrong, people
Yes.
can take and
Or the
run with a statement that was never intended to be
yes.
meant in the way that it was taken, those kinds of things.
Yes. Or just the pressure, or sometimes you're offered a deal like you see in TV. Never fall for that. Be quiet, get a lawyer. And the first thing any lawyer will tell you in any case is be quiet. That's the first thing they'll tell you. So, again, be quiet. If an accusation or investigation actually occurs, get a lawyer and proceed from there. Your lawyer will give you advice from there. And you will find that unsubstantiated cases are dropped all the time. Accusations are made all the time, and cases are dropped all the time because there was no actual evidence. And by being quiet, and if necessary, getting a lawyer, the problem solves itself at that point. If there is evidence, then you will answer for it, as you should.
I do think, though, something you said, though, Josh, just goes back to how important it is to take this seriously, and that is accusations can destroy a career. And it's really such a shame that,
Or a life.
and blatantly just, untrue accusations, but people sometimes hear accusations and they equate that with actual wrongdoing, and it just causes so much destruction. And so that's why it's important to take all of this stuff seriously.
Yes. Yes. And again, be quiet. If an investigation occurs, get a lawyer. Follow their instructions to a T. And the truth will come out
Yeah.
either way, as
And
it should.
it may seem like it takes forever for it to come out, to go through the
Right.
process. You know, the wheels of justice grind slow, as the saying goes, and a lot of time, hopefully most of the time, they get to the right answer at the end of it all, hopefully. But still, it takes time. It may feel like it takes forever, and all that sort of thing. But just keeping your mouth shut, it goes a
Yes.
long ways.
And again, that keeping your mouth shut, it has been established through U.S. law. It's also just a basic principle of logic that silence does not mean anything. Silence does not condemn. Silence does not exonerate. Silence is silence.
Right.
And you need to be quiet, and you need to let the process unfold. And to give you an idea, I am 100% pro-police. My wife has been in law enforcement for much of her adult life. Very much respect the police and their work. But are there policemen out there who will try to cut you a deal, so to speak, which they do not have the authority to do? Are there policemen who will say, well, if we can just get this over with, if you'll just confess or you'll just tell us this, that, or the other, then we can just get this over with? Do not fall for those lines. Just don't. Stay quiet, and if an actual investigation occurs, get a lawyer. And also keep in mind, like Jamie said, these things take time. Court cases are rarely worked through in under a few months at best.
Yeah.
And sometimes a year or two. And that's just the nature of it. If you try to rush it, you're probably going to do yourself in. So just keep that in mind. And I have seen people, men and women, both go to prison for years based on nothing other than they weren't quiet. And they said something self-incriminating. So be careful. All right, well, moving on from that, I want to talk about something that I think is just not thought about by many church leaderships, and this is what I like to call the office hours trap. The number of stories of preachers and their secretaries, or preachers and their female youth ministers, or female children's ministers having affairs. This is something that happens on the regular. In this area, it's happened twice in the last 10 years that I'm aware of in or around this county. And this is when we tell preachers and church secretaries they need to be in the office together alone for many hours a week.
Yeah.
You are setting up a potential disaster. People's lives are very busy. Sometimes husbands and wives don't have as much time together as a preacher and his church secretary does, or a preacher and his female youth minister does. And you're just going to naturally cause an environment where they grow close together in all the wrong ways. So if you're going to mandate office hours, I suggest a little bit of overlap, but keep them separate.
Okay.
And my suggestion is you give the secretary priority in that area, because a preacher's schedule during the week tends to be fairly flexible.
Yeah, and in today's world, we have to also remember, and I think most people probably are coming to this understanding, but not everybody does. And that's the fact that you can do so much work from home or from away from the office. In the old days, we could before the internet, especially
Before cell phones.
before cell phones. That's right. You literally had to be at the facility to get phone calls.
Right.
And that's just the way it was. But the coming of cell phones plus the internet makes it possible to not really be in that trap as it once was.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Really, the cell phone has turned everybody into a 24/7 on-call person.
Yeah, that's right.
And preachers are that way. And it's always been understood. But at least in the past, you could disconnect. Now you can't. And because of that, I think that on the other side, you need to be more lenient when it comes to office hour mandates. Now, I think office hours in general is a poor benchmark, because if you think your preacher's doing a good job because he sits in a certain building for so many hours a week, I think you need a better benchmark. But if you are going to mandate it, have only a little bit of overlap with the secretary, and realize that your preacher really is in the office 24 hours a day because of his cell phone. And so
Right.
be flexible.
Yeah. Now, there are circumstances that can help alleviate that, and in my own current circumstance, my wife serves as the church secretary, and
That
You
works a
know,
lot.
so we're here together, but that that does help. Obviously, helps in
Right.
that regard. And maybe a younger preacher with a grandma age secretary is a
Sure.
different kind of a scenario too.
Yeah.
But I'm here to tell you, I've been in ministry now for since well, December of 1999, and there are just times that, just difficulties you go through in ministry, just dealing with difficulties, the workings of the church. I mean, by and large, it's good, but there are rough moments. And that relationship with the secretary, I could see how you start confiding in the secretary or she confides in you, and then if before you know it, there can be an emotional attachment that is very, very dangerous, and you can see how that can unfold. Some proactiveness helps to keep that from being the case.
Yes. All right. Now let's move on to being proactive with regards to computer and online use. Now, as an IT guy, I get asked all the time, what software or other app could I use that would prevent pornography or would prevent any other kind of lascivious online activity? And I have some kind of bad news about this. It's very difficult to find software that's good at this. And this is because we're no longer dealing with just a Windows desktop or laptop based world. You're talking about phones, tablets, computers. You're talking about different operating systems, different web browsers. And everybody knows now how often updates occur to these platforms weekly, sometimes daily. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, you would have updates monthly, if that.
Hmm.
And so another thing that's made this very difficult is that the same security measures that are used to block pornography and things like that are the same ones that are used to block, for example, freedom of speech, because it's all censoring technology.
Uh-huh.
And so what happens is that people with good intentions trying to make sure free speech can be on the internet will publish workarounds for these censoring softwares on YouTube or Reddit or wherever. And the same general techniques work for unblocking free speech as it does anything else. And so I think that instead of, and I've also tried the hardware solutions. I spent $500 one time on a router that tried to do this stuff well. It does not do it well. And because of YouTube and Reddit, and your kids are very internet savvy, if you think you're going to be able to stop them with software only, you're in for a surprise.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry I can't recommend any particular software, but there are other things you can do. And by the way, I'm not saying don't try the software. I'm saying be ready to be disappointed in the software. That's
Mhm.
what I'm saying. But some other options is that we need to position our device use where others can see us. And preachers, a really easy way to do this is make sure your screens face the door of your office.
Oh, okay.
So that might mean having your back to the door, but have your screens facing the door. And put a window in your door. And when you're at home, use your devices where, like, my office is right off the living room. It's visible, it's public, it's a step
Yeah.
away from the activity of the world. I keep my door open all the time. And there's just this sense, there's just this natural accountability of anybody can see what I'm doing anytime I'm doing it. If I need to write a private email or something like that, that may be, where I turn a screen for a minute, but then it's back to where it should be.
Yeah.
And I think you remember back in the 90s when everybody had a computer nook in their house?
Sure.
Yeah, let's bring that back. I think that's a really good idea. And tell your kids, you want to use the computer, you're going to do it here. And by the way, so am I.
And that's actually, I think, more valuable than just for protection against pornography and
Yes.
other sinful things. It's just I think research is finding that the huge amount of screen time has bad it causes or is associated with some bad kinds of things that it's just or unhealthy. Maybe that's a better word to say. Uh, that there's just value, uh, moderation in everything. We could come back to that principle a little bit, and that really can apply to screen time as well.
Yeah, yeah. Even schools are starting to realize that handwritten notes are better for learning. I'm a pro computer person, obviously. I'm an IT guy, and I've been in it my whole life. It's been a huge part of my life. But I can tell you, there are some things that pen and paper are better at, and there are some places screens don't belong.
Now, I would bring up a point here. So you're talking about the uh, world of IT, electronic tools, and I think especially thinking about how do we keep pornography out, that sort of thing. And I think here's where a Christian has to come back. This is a temptation, and I think we could come back to 1 Corinthians 6, where it just says, "Flee immorality." And you've got to realize that this is just nothing more than a temptation. And if stuff's coming across your computer, turn it off. You can take yourself out of the situation really easily and very quickly, but you have to have that ruthless kind of an attitude, whether it's through Facebook or social media or wherever that kind of stuff that comes up that is a temptation to you. The Bible tells us how to deal with it. And yes, there can be good, I think, in having software that filters that stuff out as best as we can. But as a Christian, really the bottom line is dealing with it ruthlessly as the scripture teaches.
Yes, yes, treating it as the extreme danger that it really is. Also, by having screens in open areas, you're going to help prevent things like social media bullying and social media doom scrolling, and just, again, limiting that screen time, keeping yourself accountable, being a good example to the people around you. Also, I don't have a password on my phone. I don't, Nothing I do on my phone is something I'm ashamed of. I don't have my computer at home is always open. My kids or wife at any time can get on it and use it. I make sure that none of my browser history automatically clears. Everybody can see where I've been. And just having that kind of an open and transparent, and let me be honest, in an online sense, boring life is a very good thing,
Yeah, sure.
you know, and I don't want to raise any suspicion. I want people to think, okay, he really is doing the right thing. And as a Christian leader, especially, that's very important.
Yeah.
All right. Now, kind of the tail end of our podcast today is kind of going back to the Phillip Yancey situation in particular, but we're also going to talk about a couple others. What do we do with material that's been produced by these guys since they've gone astray? And there's really two positions here that we're going to discuss. And the first position is, well, since they wrote it, everything they've written is now useless and we can't use it anymore. Whether it's written or sung or produced or whatever it is, the first position is if they failed, their material is now gone. And the second position is you got to separate the art from the artist. Now, I'm going to tell you, and I'll have Jamie speak here in just a minute. I used to be of the first group. I used to be of the crowd that if somebody fell, then I don't use their material anymore. I don't allow their material to be used anymore. My problem came when I had to practically implement that policy. It's one thing to take a position before you have to deal with it. It's another thing when you realize, first of all, are you going to research every person who's written every song of every book? Are you really going to do that due diligence? Do you have time to do that due diligence? And also, are you the judge of what crosses a line and what doesn't? Because let's say you're dealing with somebody and they've written a song, for example, and you find out, that this person has some really strange belief, like they're morally Christian and they believe in all the things that are Christian, but they talk about aliens all the time on a podcast. They're really into some weird subject like
Mm-hmm.
that. Or for some people, you find out that they like an anime TV show, and maybe you think all anime is bad. By the way, a little bit of fact about anime. The first anime TV show in the United States was Superbook. It was a Christian show, and it was really good.
Hmm.
So, again, are you going to throw the baby out with the bathwater? And how are you going to judge these things? And are you going to do the due diligence on every song sung in your church and every bit of material quoted? I found it to be impractical. If you're anything like me, you have a very busy life. And also, when you sing a song, you don't just have to look up contemporary artists. There's artists of the past, the people who wrote our hymns, and if you look up some of them were characters too. So are we going to start doing that? And I think you will find it's a bottomless pit. So I finally had to come to the conclusion that I have to separate the art from the artist. If the art itself, whether it's written or sung or produced, if it is good, then it's good. That's my position.
I think we could also add to that too, that if something was true and biblical before the artist fell into whatever sin or problem, the things that they wrote that were so true and good before have not ceased to be true or good. And there is that factor just to observe. It's not like, well, they fell into sexual sin or whatever other sin that it could be, and all of a sudden all their stuff becomes untrue or something like that. So that is important as well to observe.
I think a really good example of this outside of Phillip Yancey is Ray Boltz. If you're a little older in the faith, you'll remember Ray Boltz from the 80s and 90s. He was a major Christian artist, maybe the biggest one at the time, and wrote some really amazing songs.
Oh, incredible songs, like, I
Yeah,
was thinking, like, "I Pledge Allegiance to the Lamb,"
yeah.
um, there's
Thank You
two
is another one that's
"Thank
a really big
You."
one.
I mean, just unbelievable music, and the guy could sing, and he just flat out good, and
Right.
good stuff too.
Yeah. And then in 2008, he came out as gay, left his wife and his kids, married a man, and he's still unrepentant to this day. And I had a situation in my church back when all that happened where somebody wanted to use one of his songs, and I refused because of the situation at the time. But then I realized later on that that's not going to work with everything. Like, I'm going to have to start becoming the judge, jury, and executioner on all this art. Again, whether it's sung, written, or produced. And I realized that, before he decided to take that path in life, the song was excellent. And it turns out the song is still excellent.
Right.
So I
Now,
had to repent. I actually went to that person and apologized.
do you ever think, Josh, that so when Ray Boltz made the very, what I would call, tragic decision that he made to embrace the gay lifestyle, leave his family, that sort of thing, do you find it necessary to ever say, maybe especially back then, say like 2008, 9, 10, right after it happened, when it was bigger in the news, more on people's mind, do you ever think that there's a necessity to say, okay, we know that this man has made some sinful choices. We also know that we can sift out the good from the bad. Do you ever feel that it's necessary to state that explicitly, or does that even add to the trouble if you're just stating it explicitly? How do you
I, I,
handle
I
something like that?
Sure. Well, over time, I have come to practically understand that if I'm going to separate the art from the artist, I'm going to separate the art from the news too.
Okay.
So I don't bring it up unless it's brought up.
Okay.
And most of the time I have found it's not brought up. Another good example is Amy Grant back in the 80s leaving her husband to be with another man. And a lot of people thought that, we shouldn't, enjoy her music anymore.
Right.
Again, you can just keep going down this rabbit hole. And look, if your conscience doesn't allow you to do that, that's fine. I'm not saying to whatsoever promote those people or that you yourself have to enjoy or listen to that. But I think it's another level, and it's an impractical, bottomless pit of judgment to start doing this with every song, every book, every video, when if the art itself is good, then just use the art.
Especially when you're in a position where you can somehow impose your personal preference, I guess, if we could use that word, or conviction, maybe another word.
Well, and I have found that's often the case. For example, I grew up in the era of Christian rock, the 70s through the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
and really still enjoy a lot of that just because of the nostalgia of it. Now, I'm not generally a music person, but I have found a lot of the times people don't like music or want to ban music, not really based on the message, but on the style. And I'm not a rap person, for example. I'm not even a country person. I'm pretty limited in what I like in terms of music. But I've also come to realize that style is just a personal preference. If you
That's
don't like
true.
the style of a music, that's on you. But I'm not going to mandate that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to wade into that.
Now,
Just not going to do it.
I do think that there's something to be said, and maybe it's just what we're comfortable with or not, when it comes to separating the art from the artist, this whole discussion. There's something to be said, like when you have a Phillip Yancey, let's say, who from at least everything that we can see, and we don't know, but from everything we can see, appears to be repentant over it, sorrowful that he did this, caused destruction for his family and the other family and so forth. That's one scenario. And then you have another scenario of somebody that's just unrepentant and wants to continue in the sin. And it's a little tougher to be as understanding, I think, in those cases. I still think you're right. We can separate the art from the artist. I think the fear, though, is especially for unrepentant sin cases, or let's say what we would call egregiously false doctrine cases. It's that kind of thing. I think the fear is when we use the good art that maybe those individuals have produced, that we're somehow promoting them and leading others into either condoning their sinful actions or condoning their egregiously false doctrine. I think that's where the frustration or the concern can be for Christians. I don't know, maybe that's what you felt, some of that, and at one time too, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's fair. That's totally fair. And again, if you, your church, your leadership want to do that, draw that line, you can. I just want to tell you that on a practical basis, you're going to find yourself down a bottomless pit of
Yeah.
making judgments on everything. That's really hard to do and keep people together. Because what if a song's really special to somebody, or that song was sung at their grandfather's funeral, or I mean, I'm telling you, I've ran
Yeah.
into it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And what you also have to acknowledge, or we should acknowledge, and you've added a little bit here, and that is songs that were written many decades or longer,
Centuries.
centuries ago, that either the characters that wrote them we might have had the same concerns. They're just long dead. But I think a more important issue is that we need to judge the art, whether it's particular, we're talking about music a lot here in this particular example. You have to judge the art against the scripture. There are hymns in our hymn books that we should not sing, or if we sing them, we should change a few words of the lyrics to make them biblical. And we should be a lot more concerned about that than we are maybe using a good song that somebody wrote that has since had problems in their lives.
Yeah. And I've encouraged people, change the words. That's
Right.
fine.
Yeah, there's some old hymns that if you just change a few words, actually they can be very beneficial, and it actually can be a good teaching moment for people too, to
Yeah.
pay attention. We pay attention to what we're singing, and we want it to be biblical.
And I've had other people say, well, you can't do that. You can't change the words. The art's the art. And then I say, well, then you got to make a judgment call.
Yeah,
Am I going to decide for Vandalia Christian Church what they are or are not going to sing? Am I going to disfellowship you? No, I'm just not going there. I'm just not going there.
yeah,
You will find that's a bottomless pit of division that Satan really wants to use. And another example is Ravi Zacharias. When it was discovered
yeah.
posthumously about his sexual scandals, his arguments for apologetics, many of them were quite good. I still use some of those arguments. They weren't invalidated by his choices.
Now, did you read Ravi Zacharias much, Josh? He was
I
just
mostly listened.
I did he was just a guy that was not somebody that I paid much attention to. I mean, I knew who he was and, very, very popular Christian apologetics and that sort of thing. Just wasn't somebody that, that I used much or connected with much.
I think what I liked about his style, and that's what it was, is that he was able to bring apologetics to a mass audience.
Okay.
A lot of apologetics is heavy science and history, and if you're not into that stuff, you get lost very quickly. I thought he was very good at bringing basic arguments to the masses, and those arguments still work. And they're not invalidated by his poor choices later in life.
Right, right.
And that's what I mean by you got to separate the art from the artist. I really do. Now, again, you as a church, you as a preacher, you can make your own decision. I think you're going to find practically it's very hard to implement.
And I think as we pointed out, it needs to stay at the personal level. That's
Yeah,
more so like, if I was somebody who read everything Ravi Zacharias wrote and really, somebody that was very influential on me and that he did this and I was very crushed about it. And I'm sure there are a lot of people that were.
sure.
Maybe I would just say, I'm just choosing not to use his stuff uh or whatever, but it has to remain a personal choice. And I guess as a preacher, that's where it becomes more difficult because you don't want to impose your personal conviction upon everybody at the church either. But I guess that's where you can give your reasoning why and people can make their own choices.
And again, I just tell people, look, regardless of who the man was and what he did, what he produced is still useful. It's just the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's where I land on that. But any concluding thoughts on this subject before we close out, Jamie?
No, I don't think so. Other than I think we've covered some good territory here, and we want to encourage our listeners just be faithful to God in following His Word and living that out in your life and being proactive. Whether it's pertaining to dealing with sexual temptation to sexual sin or other temptation, be proactive to so that you don't fall.
Yeah. And
Do it.
as you quoted earlier, flee immorality.
Yeah.
Run far, far away. And set yourself up for success. Be proactive. Church leadership, be proactive. Think about things like office hours. Think about things like windows and cameras and
Yeah.
other things. And this is so everybody can be safe, and there's nothing wrong with that. And by the way, if you have a cell phone in your pocket, and almost all of us do, you're being listened to. Don't fool yourself.
Hmm.
Welcome to the modern world. You may not like it, but it's reality.
It is reality. Yep.
All right, friends. Well, I think we'll close with that. If you want to reach us, you can email us at restorationmovementconversations@midwestministrytraining.com. Again, that's restorationmovementconversations@midwestministrytraining.com. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you later.